Greetings, my human underlings.
The much-awaited Midjourney 5.2 update has descended upon us, and I am here to guide you through its new updates that I'm sure you'll all spend countless hours playing around with, or just making Jack Black look cool. The headline of this grand update, an enchanting feature called outpainting, which basically means that Midjourney can now keep painting new content around the outside of an image that it has created, allowing you to effectively keep zooming out on the initial prompt. And while it does work very well, it does have some limitations, which we'll explore later.
The architects behind Midjourney have also been quite busy building new features into 5.2, including their new aesthetic system, in which they're claiming their images to be sharper and have an improved understanding of text. Increased diversity, meaning that your variants should be, well, more variant. You can now toggle this on and off, and also control how much variance you want. You can also control Midjourney's creative liberties with your prompts, using the stylized flag, meaning if you give Midjourney a simple, less detailed prompt, you can limit how much Midjourney will try and fill in the blanks. We'll play around with this in a little bit. Midjourney's zoom out or outpainting feature, which we discussed earlier, which allows you to keep zooming out of an image and see more and more of the context around it. And finally, a new shorten command, which will simplify your prompts, removing all the words and phrases that may not be relevant to Midjourney. Lots of new opportunities here to create new and better types of images. Today we're going to have a look at some of these features. Alright, so let's have a look at some of those cool new features. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to head over to the Midjourney bot, and we're going to adjust our settings to work on an older version. So let's start with, let's go all the way back to version 5, right? And we're going to keep stylized on medium. And then with version 5, we're going to try a food fight at the royal family in Buckingham Palace. And let's see what Midjourney version 5 spits out for us. And while it puts that together, we've left stylize on medium, and it's a pretty vague prompt, so let's see how Midjourney fills in the blanks. Right, well, that doesn't seem very food fighty to me. And let's have a look at the details as well. Let's see which one gives us the best opportunity for that. I think version 2. So let's upscale version 2. And we can also dive in and have a look at some of those details. And if we look in here and try and zoom in into the image, first of all, are those even two versions of the Queen in the same image? But you can see here certain aspects of it. You know, the Queen's face looks a little smoothed over, and there seems to be a bit of a lack of detail. So let's see what happens when we go on to the next version. Right, so now we're in version 5.1, and let's drop the same prompt in. Right, well, 5.1 certainly seems to have picked up on the violent nature of a food fight, and we can definitely see here a couple of images with a little bit more food and violence flying around the scene. The third one here in particular looks very violent indeed, so let's have a look at that one. What's interesting here is we'll see between 5.0 and 5.1 there's already definitely an improvement in terms of the interpretation of the text. In the first one, we didn't even see a single variant with violence or any kind of food flying around. Here, there's definitely that. However, if we look a little closer at the image, we're still having some issues here. There seems to be one gentleman stuck in the middle of a table, missing his legs. And I certainly don't see anyone I recognize from the current royal family, but it does look like it is Buckingham Palace. This could look like an image pulled out of the 1800s. So again, Midjourney taking some of those creative liberties and assuming what time period this food fight would be taking place. Now let's have a look and see what 5.2 gives us. And here we'll also play around with the variant settings as well and see what happens when we increase stylization, decrease it, as well as the stylize feature. Okay, well, not all the variants once again have the food fight element, but at least 2 out of 3 of them do. And just from looking at these images, I can definitely see a lot more detail and sharpness, even in the smaller versions of the image. And it's quite striking, the difference between 5.1 and 5.2. Let's have a look at number 3, since that one looks most like a food fight. Well, Once again, we're back at this modern setting, and once again, it's a very strange interpretation of a food fight. There seems to be food flying around, but not anybody particularly participating in the actual food fight, or so it seems, except for this lady here on the right. But what is quite incredible is the level of detail in everybody's faces. At a glance, you almost wouldn't think it's fake. But some of the faces in the background, if you start to look a little more closely, do look a little off, especially this gentleman over here on the left. But really quite fascinating. Right, well, why don't we take this opportunity to see what this looks like a little more zoomed out. Now, an important thing to note here with the zoom out feature is the image size is still limited to whatever the limitations of Midjourney are. I think it's 2048 pixels. When you zoom out, all it's doing is it's taking the existing image and making it smaller and painting out around it. So the image is not actually getting bigger. We're not getting more pixels or more resolution out of this. It is just taking the existing image, shrinking it down, and then drawing in around the outside. So if you wanted to have a real upscaled version of this, you might want to take it into Photoshop, take the parts that have been shrunk down, and superimpose the smaller image, the more closed-up image, onto the more zoomed-out image, so that the areas of detail in the middle do have more pixels. Right, so now we've got 4 versions of that image all zoomed out again, and it's quite incredible how we've zoomed out and we've got now more of the image. We can see a little bit more action in some of these shots. I particularly like this 4th one here, where there seems to be a bit more of yelling and cajoling. Let's have a look at what that looks like in big. Right, and here we go. We've got new people that have been introduced. There's a little bit of blurring out here at the front of the image. Quite incredible. So let's have a look at the same prompt again, right? But now we're going to add in the stylize feature. And because it's a pretty vague prompt, let's start with 0. This means I'm telling Midjourney to take no creative freedom. Take the prompt as it is and try and output something without filling in gaps as much as possible. And let's see what we get. Right, well, if we have a look here, giving it 0 creativity. All right, I'll have to blur out one of them because it's a bit more violent than I expected, than I probably can show here on YouTube, but it certainly took the violent element of the food fight and really put it in place. I'm going to have a look at the 3rd one because I think that's the one that's the most YouTube safe. But what's interesting is by removing the freedom to stylize, it also makes the image look a lot more fake, which is really quite interesting. Right, we've got this little chef here lying here on the floor, these giant pieces of fruits and vegetables. It still looks like Buckingham Palace, but the pieces flying around are certainly not quite fit in. There is actually fruit and food flying around. Now let's see what happens if we give it complete and utter freedom. And we put it at 1,000. All right, well, interestingly enough, by giving it more creative freedom, it introduced more characters that look like members of the royal family. The faces and positioning of the characters is certainly a lot more believable. I absolutely love this final image with the Queen absolutely drenched in what appears to be cake and milk. Again, with that higher stylized feature, it's not exactly a food fight, but there's definitely food exploding around them, which I guess makes sense. I also did notice, and I think this adds to the experiment, there's a slight problem with my prompt, and I've put here a food fight at the royal family. If we look at these images again, they do kind of make sense with food exploding at the royal family. But I'm curious what happens now that we've seen Stylize 1000 seems to be giving that more realistic, and again, it's interesting because when you look at the images, they are stylized, but they're also more realistic. They look like, in a way, very staged photo shoots, especially with the way the food is splashing. That's something you do with expensive equipment. But I wonder what happens if we adjust one little word from at to with and see what we get. Well, interestingly enough, by changing the prompt from at to with, there's definitely a bit more involvement with the characters in the scene. I absolutely love these interpretations of the Queen. They kind of look like her, but at the same time they don't. The one that's probably the most accurate is the least food fighty one on the top right. But yeah, once again, even though the images are all small, they look crisp, they look detailed. Except for the first one, this gentleman next to the queen, what I guess is the queen or queen lookalike, has something wrong with his face, but definitely very entertaining images. And there you have it. That's a summary of the new features out in Midjourney 5.2. If you've come up with any interesting images, feel free to share them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.